I didn't marry into a family. I married into a hierarchy, and I was placed at the bottom. The first few months I thought I was just adjusting. I excused the little things. The way my mother-in-law would call me dear, but bark orders like I was her maid. The way my sister-in-law would roll her eyes if I didn't jump up fast enough to refill her wine, or the way they'd all suddenly remember I was there when something needed to be cleaned, fetched, or fixed. I thought I was imagining it, that it was just new family awkwardness, but that awkwardness never went away. It hardened into routine, into expectation, into disrespect. I was the housekeeper, the chef, the errand runner, the scapegoat, all wrapped in one smiling, exhausted shell of a woman. And the worst part? My husband let it happen. He said things like, "That's just how they are," or "Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally, because it was personal. They judged everything I did, from how I folded towels to how I cooked rice. They made backhanded compliments sound like praise. "Oh wow, you actually made something edible this time." I was expected to show up early to family gatherings to help prepare, and stay late to clean up. While the rest of them laughed and drank wine, I stood at the sink scrubbing their dishes. One Thanksgiving, I spent 2 days preparing everything from scratch. Turkey, stuffing, pies. My mother-in-law took one bite and said, "It's fine, but your gravy's lumpy. I'll make it next year." No thanks. No compliment. Just that. I smiled through clenched teeth. But inside something snapped. But deep down, An made a promise. They would never treat me like this again. They wanted a servant? I'd give them one. Just not the kind they were expecting. Because this time I wasn't cleaning up their mess. I was about to make one they'd never forget. It started subtly, like a fog rolling in slowly, making it harder to breathe before you even realize you're suffocating. In the beginning, I chalked everything up to nerves. I had just married into a close-knit, traditional family that had their own way of doing things. I thought I was the outsider who needed to learn the ropes, not the victim of a system designed to grind me down. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, would smile sweetly in front of others, but become cold and dismissive when it was just us. She'd hand me a mop without asking and say things like, "You don't mind helping, do you? That's what good wives do." Her version of helping included cleaning her entire kitchen, reorganizing her pantry, folding her laundry, and taking care of her dog, all while she sat on the couch, resting her knees. She never raised her voice and never insulted me directly. No, Eleanor was smarter than that. She preferred her cruelty served cold, with a condescending smile and thinly veiled suggestions that somehow always ended in me doing her chores. Then there was my sister-in-law, Becca. She was 32, lived with her parents, and treated me like I was hired staff. She once tossed her dirty clothes at my feet during a visit and said, "Can you handle this since you're already doing laundry?" As if I were some live-in maid instead of a guest in the house. Every weekend became a rotation of chores disguised as family bonding. They'd invite us over for Sunday dinner, but the moment we arrived, I was swept into a flurry of preparation. I'd chop vegetables, set the table, and cook while the rest of the women chatted in the living room. After dinner, they'd all mysteriously vanish while I did the dishes alone. And Matt, my husband, just kept saying, "They're just old-fashioned. It's not personal." But how could it not be personal when I was the only one being treated like this? I tried bringing it up gently at first. I told him I felt overwhelmed, that I was being treated unfairly. He shrugged. "It's just family stuff. Don't stir the pot." So I stopped talking. I told myself maybe I needed to try harder. So I did. I went to every gathering with a smile. I baked pies from scratch, arranged flowers for their centerpieces, bought them gifts they barely acknowledged. I cleaned their house as if it were my own, cooked meals I never got to enjoy because I was too busy making sure everyone else was happy. I was invisible, useful, but never appreciated, present, but never cared for. The breaking point came on our anniversary weekend. Matt and I had planned a short getaway, a cozy cabin in the mountains. Nothing fancy, just a little peace and quiet. But the night before we were supposed to leave, Eleanor called. She said she was feeling a bit under the weather and asked Matt if we could just swing by for a few hours to help her around the house. I begged him to say no. I reminded him we had plans. He hesitated, then he said, "It's just for a little while. We'll still go after." We didn't. We spent the whole day at his parents' house while I scrubbed their guest bathroom and organized Eleanor's spice rack. When we finally got home, it was too late to leave. Matt fell asleep watching TV. I cried in the shower silently because I didn't want him to hear me. Not because I cared about the trip, but because I realized I had married someone who would always choose them over me. And worst of all, they knew it. And worst of all, they knew it. That was the moment I stopped hoping things would change. I stopped trying to be accepted. Something in me began to shift. But I had opened my eyes. There's a kind of breaking that doesn't happen in one loud moment. No shouting, no door slams, no explosive confrontation. It's quiet. It's slow. It's invisible to everyone but you. It's when you realize, on some random Tuesday, that you've been slowly erased. And that's exactly what happened to me. It wasn't one single thing that pushed me over the edge. It was all of it. Every dinner I cooked without thanks. Every favor that became an expectation. Every time I smiled when someone mocked me or cleaned a room just to have someone walk in and ask why I missed a corner. It was 1,000 paper cuts. And one day, I woke up already bleeding. Matt didn't notice. That morning, he asked if I could drop off dry cleaning for his mom on the way to the grocery store, as if I was their unpaid errand girl. I didn't even respond. I just stared at him and walked out the door. I drove past the dry cleaner, past the store, past everything, and just kept driving. I ended up in a park 2 towns over, sitting on a bench under a tree, clutching my keys so tightly they left dents in my palm. I watched a group of women laughing as they sipped coffee and shared stories, and I felt like I was watching a version of a life I no longer had access to. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. I deleted everything, every family event, every reminder tied to someone else's needs. Then I opened a blank note and wrote, "Who were you before you let them define you?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I needed to find out. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't fold laundry. I didn't even speak to Matt. I went straight to the guest room and closed the door. He didn't follow. The next day, I signed up for a free online course I had bookmarked over a year ago. Something about creative branding. Something I used to care about before I became a full-time people pleaser. I also applied for a part-time remote job. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Small things, but powerful. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling myself back into existence. I stopped offering help when no one asked how I was doing. I stopped attending every brunch, every last-minute gathering, every guilt-tripped family event. When they called, I let it ring. When they asked, I said, I can't. I stopped justifying. I stopped apologizing. The silence made them uncomfortable. Matt began noticing. He started asking questions. Are you okay? I smiled. I will be. He didn't understand what that meant. He thought I was just tired. He had no idea I was rebuilding, and I was doing it quietly from the ground up. I created a separate bank account and funneled all my freelance earnings into it. I joined a local co-working space where no one knew me as Matt's wife. I started going to therapy every Wednesday. It was the only hour of the week where I spoke freely and didn't feel crazy. The therapist asked me one question that shifted everything. If your daughter married someone like Matt and ended up living your exact life, would you be proud? I didn't answer. I just cried. That night I sat in my car outside our house for a full hour before walking in. I stared at the front door thinking, I live here. But I don't belong here. That was when the fire inside me returned. So I wasn't just sad anymore. I was awake. I was angry. Not the loud, messy kind, the quiet kind, the focused kind. I began observing everything, documenting patterns, tracking manipulation, logging how often Matt sided with his family, how often they used me, how often I swallowed my voice. I started saving texts, recording voicemails, screenshotting messages, not to use them, yet, but to remind myself this is real. This is not in your head. I didn't know what I would do with the screenshots, the voicemails, the receipts. Not yet. But collecting them was like building armor, layer by layer, a quiet rebuild. A way to say to myself, I'm still here. A way to say to myself, you're not imagining this. You're not crazy. You're not weak. I started keeping a journal again. Not the soft, poetic kind. Just raw bullet points, facts, timestamps. Monday, Mill asked me to mop floor during dinner. Tuesday, Becca dropped off laundry at my door without asking. Wednesday, Matt laughed when Eleanor said, at least she's good for chores. I wasn't writing to vent. I was documenting a pattern. I was drawing the blueprint of a cage. when I had been taught to decorate instead of escape. And then one night, I wrote a question in bold at the top of a fresh page. If this isn't abuse, what is it? I stared at it for a long time. The truth was ugly. But it was also clear. I wasn't in a family, I was in a system. And that system was designed to keep me useful, silent, and small. So I flipped the page. And for the first time, I didn't write about what they did. I wrote about what I could do. Not to hurt, not to destroy, but to reclaim. I started simple. What do they rely on me for? What do they assume I'll always say yes to? What would happen if I said no? Then I made a second list. Things they fear. Public embarrassment, loss of control, not being seen as the perfect family. It wasn't a revenge list. It was a reminder of power, not theirs, mine. That night I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't scream. I smiled. Just a little, because now I had a plan. And then I opened a blank post and typed the first line. I didn't marry into a family. I married into a hierarchy. The first time I truly said no, and meant it, something in me unlocked. Not just defiance, so not just pride, power. It was addictive. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I had a choice. I wasn't trapped in their cycle. I wasn't stuck in this dutiful daughter-in-law script. I didn't need to obey to survive. I could say no. I could walk away. And more importantly, I could fight back. Quietly, strategically, in a way they'd never see coming. So I started playing a different game. I didn't confront Eleanor. I didn't yell at Becca. I didn't argue with Matt. I smiled. I nodded. I watched. And I plotted. They thought they were still in control, that I was just going through a rough patch, that I'd bounce back and go right back to scrubbing floors and hosting holidays. But I had no intention of going back. I was done surviving. I was preparing. It began with the calendar. Eleanor always made a big deal out of her birthday brunch, an over-the-top pastel-themed mimosa-fueled ordeal that she expected me to plan every year. The guest list, the food, the favors, the flowers. She handed it all off to me like I was a party planner, then took all the credit when guests arrived. This year I said I'd handle it. Cheerfully. And then I didn't. I let her send out the invites. I let her brag on Facebook that her brunch was going to be spectacular, thanks to my lovely daughter-in-law. And then I booked a 2-day retreat for myself at a spa 2 towns away. No phone, no email. Just silence. The day of her party, her phone blew up with confused guests asking why no one was there. No food, no decoration, no host. Just Eleanor and her Sunday best, waiting. I turned my phone back on at 7 p.m. and found 20 missed calls. I didn't respond. The next day, Matt stormed in. What the hell happened? You promised her. I looked at him, calm, cold. Number she assumed. I never confirmed. He blinked. That's cruel. I tilted my head. Is it? Or is it just fair? That shut him up. But that was only the beginning. A few days later, I printed out a year's worth of receipts, groceries, decorations, cleaning supplies, gifts, gas for errands, and put them in a neat little envelope. I wrote a sticky note on top. Since I'm no longer working for free, here's what I'm owed. Please forward to Eleanor. I left it on the counter and walked out. They didn't pay me, of course. That wasn't the point. The point was, I was done pretending I was a part of their family, done pretending this was mutual. If they wanted to treat me like hired help, they could deal with the financial consequences of their illusion. Next came the story. I created a brand new Reddit account. No names, no locations, just truth. Raw, brutal, and honest. About the years of unpaid labor, about the constant manipulation, about how a woman can be erased inside a marriage and no one notices. I shared my story anonymously in a private online community for women going through toxic in-law dynamics. I didn't expect much. But within a day, it exploded. Hundreds of comments, messages, support from strangers who had lived the same pain. It went viral. Thousands of comments, messages from women thanking me, others sharing their own stories. Even a therapist DM'd me asking to use it as a case study. Matt saw it. Eleanor saw it. Becca saw it. How do I know? Because a week later, Eleanor sent me an email. Not a call, not a text. An actual formal email with the subject line, "You humiliated me." She said the post sounded a lot like her and that people in her book club were asking questions. I replied with 2 words, "Prove it." And I signed it with a smiley face. Matt became distant after that. He started staying later at work, or so he said. I think he was embarrassed. By the story, by the attention, by the fact that the woman he thought was soft and safe had grown claws. We started sleeping in separate rooms. We barely spoke. One night I found a message on his phone from Becca. It read, "She's making us look like monsters. Do something." He hadn't replied. That was the moment I realized something. I didn't need to destroy them. They were already unraveling. I just had to let it happen. My final move wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a notarized letter. I handed it to Matt one morning over coffee. He looked at the envelope, confused. "What's this?" "A separation agreement," I said. "I'm moving out next month. You'll stay here. I'm taking the savings I've earned. The freelance account is mine. Don't contact me unless it's important." He stared at me like I'd just slapped him. "You're leaving?" I smiled. "Number I left months ago. I'm just making it official." I moved out quietly. No drama, no yelling, no last-minute apologies, just boxes, silence, and peace. I moved into a small apartment downtown, just mine. I decorated however I liked. I hosted dinners with friends. I laughed again. I cooked for joy, not obligation. I danced in my kitchen at midnight with a glass of wine, and I never once looked back. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't pretty either. There were nights I sat alone in my new apartment and questioned everything. Did I overreact? Was I too cold? Too harsh? Did walking away mean I failed? But then I remembered the silence. The slow, aching kind that wrapped around me in Matt's house. The exhaustion of being useful but never loved. Of being seen but never valued. And I knew. I didn't leave a family. I left a cage. Word spread, of course. Eleanor told everyone I'd abandoned them, that I was ungrateful, spoiled, a drama queen. She tried to spin her story first. But the people who mattered, they saw through it. Becca unfollowed me on everything. Matt never reached out again. I heard whispers that Eleanor's legendary brunches weren't happening anymore, that Becca's baby shower had become a cautionary tale, that the family had become quieter, smaller, less smug. I didn't smile at their misfortune. I didn't need to. Sometimes the best revenge is absence. I built something new, not grand, not perfect, but mine. I got promoted at work. I joined a hiking club. I reconnected with my sister, who once told me I was disappearing when I married Matt. She cried the first time she came to my apartment and said, "You look like yourself again." That meant more than any apology from them ever could. I also started mentoring women online, mostly through support groups, but sometimes one-on-one. Women like me, who'd been taught to stay quiet, who thought being useful was the same as being loved. I told them what I wish someone had told me. You are not selfish for needing respect. You are not dramatic for wanting peace. One night I was sipping tea on my balcony when I got an anonymous message from someone I didn't know. "Thank you. Your story helped me leave a toxic marriage. I didn't think I could until I saw that someone else did." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and whispered, "Good." Because that was it. That was the point. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming something no one should ever take from you. Your voice, your time, your life. And I'm never giving them up again. Have you ever been expected to keep the peace at the cost of your own peace? What's something you did quietly that changed everything? If your daughter were in your shoes, would you tell her to stay or leave?